Hello and welcome to GAA Embedded here on Balls.ie with me, Mick McCarthy, joined once again this week by Maurice Brosser. We're going to look ahead to lots of things, Maurice. We're going to talk about the week that was in the club championship. There's lots of interesting tidbits to talk about and lots more going on in the wider world of the GAA as well, from possibly Billy Sheehan taking over in Laois, from Andy Moran, his first managerial job in Leitrim, which I'm definitely excited to talk about, and lots more as well. Looks like more updates on Congress, which is what we love at this time of year. But before we get into that, we were just talking off air earlier on today about Cool Derry's great Brian Carroll, 38 years old. He scored 315 in the Offaly Championship this weekend, which is just one of those score lines that is just absolutely hilarious straight away. But it got us thinking. We talked obviously last week a lot about these guys, these county legends who are still like kind of knocking it over at club level, and this was just this perfect example. But when we were chatting about it, what we actually were talking about was, are there certain guys who were born at the wrong time? So these like really great, I don't mean people from weaker counties that were always weaker. So we've always had the conversations about the Declan Browns of the world and so on, right? But what about guys from formerly strong counties, or even counties that are going through a dip, that happen to have their career during that? Like, I would say Brian and Shane Dooley from Offaly are right in there as two great examples. Two players that would have made an impact and been big players on any Offaly team that were winning All-Irelands for like the guts of 30 years. And I just thought it was like, I would definitely have Brian Carroll as somebody who would fit into that bracket.
Yeah, so this goes back to a conversation we had last week in a way, Mick, I think, because it's about narrative. So you talk about, say for example, the best way to demonstrate what we're talking about here is by an example. So to me, the best example of this, in a similar vein actually to Brian Carroll, is Michael Meehan. And like I said before, I think he's the greatest Galway footballer that I ever saw play. To my mind, he is right up there in the upper echelon. He belongs, he should be regarded the same way that Park Joyce is regarded. I think, a county legend, Michael Donnan and Jeff Allen. But Michael Meehan never won an All-Ireland. He actually never won an All-Star, which to me is absolutely baffling. I always go back to the day he destroyed Kerry in the rain. That year of all years, he surely deserved one. But the whole point is that if he had been, only a couple of years previous, he would have got his All-Ireland. He would have got probably the recognition that he deserves. And instead, for a generation within Galway, he probably is still regarded. I do think internally within the county, he is regarded as one of the county's greatest ever footballers because of what they saw him do with Caltra, that great club team. But that's probably not as appreciated, I would say, nationally. And because of that, he kind of, I don't know, it's weird to describe Michael Meehan as underappreciated, but he probably was.
Do you think they lose their place in history in a way? And I think you do that more if you're from a stronger county. So it's all relative. Michael Meehan didn't play on terrible Galway teams. They weren't relegated to the equivalent of the Christy Ring Cup like Offaly were. But, the team before had won 2 All-Irelands. And Michael Donlan and Porrick Joyce and these boys are going down in history as some of the greatest Galway players of all time. Michael Meehan is as good as them, but didn't play on those teams. And you lose your place in history. Whereas, again, not to be like always harping back to Declan Brown, and he's the example that comes to mind. There's a guy in every county almost, who played on a weekend, and they almost have their place in history because they're thinking of, when you think of Tipperary football, the struggle through the ages, you think, and Declan Brown was there winning All-Stars and so on and so forth. These guys don't have that because 5 years beforehand you had legends winning All-Irelands, So I think Meehan's a really good example. I think there's two things with him that's mixed in, is the injuries as well. I think the way injuries kind of interrupted his career and his flow. I think he was somebody who was appreciated nationally. Going back to the old days, there was someone that jumps out to me is Jimmy Smith from Clare, the hurler, who's, is regarded. He's one of those people that, like, when you talk about, Christy Ring loved Jimmy Smith, that there's that, he's a Railway Cup legend, but like Clare obviously maybe at the time would be thought of as a weaker county, and he was in a way the Declan Brown figure. But obviously as time progressed and the team of the 70s kind of came and went and had great teams, and then the actual team of the 90s and so on and so forth that had legends that last forever, and then you have this guy who everybody in the county looked up to and seen as the godfather of hurling in the county, and he was the beacon, he was the only national figure. That dies over time when the county goes and has actual success.
And to your mind, is he still held in the same regard within the county?
Like I would imagine so if anybody thought about it. Do you know what I mean? But we don't have to go back to Jimmy Smith as often now in the head. So like, you know, even the 70s players, even the likes of, like, if Gerlach Nan didn't go on to manage the team, would people be talking about him in the same vein? I think they would. I think they'd say he was a great player and so on. But the first people you're going to reach for are the Brian Lowens and the Shawnee McMahons and James O'Connors and David Fitzgerald. Like, that's just a fact, because they went and won titles. And there's, you know, by the way, players are involved in teams that win titles as well. We shouldn't dismiss it. It's not of course, a player's part in a good team is not to be dismissed in their achievements, but at the same time, you can't do it on your own either, and you can't do it if you're only one or two, and that's where I think a lot of this falls into. I think of, is Benny Coulter someone that fits into this as somebody who, like, they did play in an All-Ireland final, but he was around he came right after Down's successful era and lasted for an awful long time as their national figure, as their one guy who would have kind of got on any team, but Down weren't winning too many matches back then.
Yeah, so this is a really good topic, because there's two separate things going on here. There's what you mentioned there, which is a guy who was born in maybe the wrong era, or a guy who's, effectively carrying his own, puts the county on his back and starts carrying it, and he develops that regard. So I think, even though Benny Coulter may fall into this category, he still definitely gets the appreciation nationally that he deserves, because he would be kind of synonymous with that Down team.
True, yeah.
And then on the other side, right, you have, like, some people will be proposing examples listening to us right here now, and the two that I think should immediately be disqualified are, a lot of people will propose players from the Mayo football team. So you go back to Kieran MacDonald right up to Lee Keegan, and a lot of people will propose the great Waterford team. I'm sure there's people saying John Milan and Dan and Ken, or all these different lists of players that they would rattle off. Now, I think that's a different thing. That's a different thing, because you could pick, you say, Lee Keegan, if he was only born in a different era, like, what era are you talking about? Like, are we going back to the 50s?
So. I think Lee Keegan's the opposite.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So those people who would say, these players are born wrong. Kieran MacDonald, I'm sure a lot of people say that again. I think that we
had a couple of suggestions for Kieran MacDonald, actually. Now, I do understand that in a way, in that he wasn't there. He wasn't born in this particular golden era. If this Mayo team had Kieran MacDonald, I think he would have been that extra step that would have kicked them onto an All-Ireland. But at the same time, he played on decent Mayo teams that made All-Ireland finals. I think he played in 3 All-Ireland finals in his career. They weren't uncompetitive. I don't think you could suggest that he was there at an era where his influence couldn't, he was able to do enough on a team that was already there to bring them to All-Ireland finals. I think that surely that discounts him.
So that's the first category I was talking about here, is where internally, if there was a different era. Then there's the external era, the literal era of play they're involved in. So I often think of somebody like Jamie Clark. He's just one example of, I think, several players who just came along in the wrong era, like, generationally talented inside forwards who, at the same time as they were bursting onto the scene, we saw teams, widespread adopt blanket defenses, floating men behind the ball. God knows we gave out about it enough at the time. What that did to those kind of players and stifle them out of the game. And so they had a really unique skill set, like an exceptionally unique skill set that we never actually got to see. Don't get me wrong, like, we saw, nobody would say Jamie Clark wasn't a good player or he didn't reach his potential, but we didn't get to see it for over a sustained period because of the undue pressure that were put on players like that. So, and this was often said, there's players who came just before that era, and people often wonder what would have happened if they'd came slightly later. Like someone like Colin Cooper. Would Colin Cooper have ever survived in that? Whatever, it's probably not a 10-year window. At most, it's maybe a 5 to 8 year window where this was the tried and trusted top of the majority of teams in the county. But because of that, you get a player like that who, like, are you saying Jamie Clark, you'd have to bring him back to an era like 2002, and maybe then would he have been held in the same regard as Oisin McConville? Maybe, but at the same time, I just think that those players were playing football in an era that didn't suit them. And that works conversely as well. There's players who played, I watch old games. I think there's certain players that you think would still survive in the modern era. Maybe they'd still be same way appreciated, though.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I completely see what you're coming from. Like, the styles don't suit it. But it was funny when you did mention Kerry and you mentioned Gooch. I did think almost back to the less. I'm obviously not jumping into this in as deep a way as you are in terms of when they were able to play, but more just kind of like the quality of teams they were on.
Yeah.
Does Maurice Fitzgerald fit into this? I know he won his All-Ireland, and because he won his All-Ireland, and then a couple of years later had like probably the most famous football moment of all time. So it is hard to say because, you know, a guy goes and wins an All-Ireland and it's synonymous with just that one name. It's hard to say he played on weaker counties, but he also did have a long career beforehand where Kerry were absolutely muck.
Yeah, this is probably one of the most topical debates in Kerry, you know, over the last 20 years is was Maurice Fitzgerald underappreciated? Was more to the point, was he underutilized? You know, could he have been starting against more frequently in later stages of his career? I kind of think he doesn't. So what you get a Cavan semi-final when he just destroys them single-handedly. The onus was on him to do that. And does a Kerry player excel in the same way if he was playing? You know, does Maurice Fitzgerald have the license to do that? Exactly, yeah. So like, if he's surrounded, if he comes along 10 years later, let's say you slot him in there in this. We'll bring it up to 2009 if you want, and we'll say we'll slot him in, and so you got Paul Galvin, Declan Sullivan, Maurice Fitzgerald, Colm Cooper, Kieran Donaghy, Tommy Walsh. Like, does Maurice Fitzgerald have the license to be not selfish is obviously the wrong word, but is there the same onus on him to carry the team in the same way? And if there isn't the same onus on him to carry the team in the same way, does he stand out as much as he did when he had that expectation on him?
Yeah, but is he also kind of that guy who could win a game on his own on any given day and is still seen as one of the greats, but also has 6 All-Ireland medals as well? Yeah. I think he might be discounted by the fact that even though he probably was there at the wrong time in general, he lifted them and was around long enough for Kerry to start winning All-Irelands again and has 2 to his name. One player from Kerry, actually, because Kerry don't have a big window of a time when you were, like, if you were, there's only about 5 years you could have been born in the 20th or 21st century where you were born at the wrong time for Kerry. But Connie Murphy, I believe, might be the only Kerry All-Star to never win an All-Ireland. I could be wrong about that stat. People can correct me if I am, but he won an All-Star in 1989, and I think he might be the only ever player from Kerry to win that has an All-Star but doesn't have an All-Ireland medal. And that just says everything. Yeah. Well, again, you might not have known it because it might be not true, Maurice. And this is the problem with doing all of a sudden topics at the start of a show. Before we move on, somebody has a really good one here that I actually, again, it's worthy of a debate because our made-up rules here change things. But somebody says you don't even have to Faithful Facts, which is a great name for an Offaly Twitter account, says don't even have to look outside the county. This is from Brian Carroll. Niall McNamee, what a footballer for some amount of time. A lot of similarities actually there with Carroll, but again, because Offaly had great teams, does every good player from Offaly qualify, or is Niall McNamee like this kind of national figure on a weaker county? It is hard to put your finger on it, but I think it may be a team that had the Connors and won All Irelands, even if it was 40 years ago. You probably are in the wrong era there, you know?
Yeah, I watched Road Play. I didn't watch Road. I watched the highlights on TG Carr last week, and within 5 minutes, Niall McNamee gave just this, he ignored a mark, played on, threw a dummy solo, hand pass ball across the box for a goal. It was just a sensational skill. And about 5 minutes later, a ball went right in front of him, and he didn't bend his back, tried to flick it up, like, the typical corner forwards to just flick it up to him. Ball missed, went up, was intercepted, went up the other end, and they scored. And I was thinking, mercurial talents like that don't get the same leash if they aren't playing for slightly weaker counties. They're given there's a bit more freedom to express yourself in that sort of system. Whereas if you are playing, like, do you do that in an All-Ireland winning team? Do you have the same ability? Now, like, people will say that's not to take away from Niall McNamee because he's such a joy in himself, and I think he's appreciated for what he is. How many times were we celebrating him in the early round of the Leinster Championship this summer, for example, or even in the league? So he's appreciated for standing out for what he is. So I don't know if that disqualifies him, but he might not be in the same category as somebody like Michael Meehan, for example.
Yeah, I know what you're saying as well. Like there's an element of like Damien Duff could do it at Blackburn, but when he went to Chelsea, Mourinho put the shackles on him, and
exactly,
you become a different player almost. Yeah, so you play at that higher level, you're not allowed to do as much. Okay, so we've got a few there. There's other messages come in saying Kieran McDonald, we've already talked about. Somebody else saying Jamie Clark, who you obviously mentioned as a really good example there. I'm sure there are more. I'm trying to go around, like I'm trying to think of any current players that are there. Daniel Flynn jumps to mind for me from Kildare. He's just
that's a great one.
Those players that I'm very, very excited about watching whenever I see him. And it's always a pity to me that Kildare just aren't like that. They're a good side, they're a decent side, they're always knocking around Division 1 and 2. But if they were just that notch higher, would Daniel Flynn be a superstar? So there's always plenty of guys out there at the moment. Anyone else from current that you kind of can think of before we move on? We'll get people to message in anyway. We might come back to it next week.
Yeah, so like a lot of people are going to start suggesting people are going to start suggesting great hurlers who'd never won their All Ireland. I mentioned there's a couple of Galway ones as well. Damien Hayes, always conversations, or Ollie Canning. But the whole point is that if you transfer them to a different era, do they excel in the same way? Like if Damien Hayes is playing in the All Ireland winning team, does he stand out alongside Mannion, Joe, Conor Whelan? To the same extent. I think they're slightly. These are the nuances that have to be considered when you.
Possibly. Ollie Canning's not a bad shout, though. I have to say, that wasn't the strongest Galway team for most of the time he was there, and he's winning 4 all stars from cornerback on a team that never won All Ireland.
I'm trying to think. Is there like this current Kerry team that haven't won an All Ireland? Like I often think of somebody like Will. I was going to say, would we appreciate Paul Murphy, but he obviously was involved in 2014. But I wonder, is there going to be like this is the conversation is going to start cropping up around. I don't want to put this hex on them, but there's a generation here of generationally talented Kerry footballers who, if they don't win an Ireland in the next year or two, suddenly it's going to become like the Joe Canning conversation all over again. Yeah. And now I still think that they don't qualify, by the way, because I do think they will be appreciated, certainly in the moment, as being some of the best footballers we've ever seen.
And also because if we're talking about 7 or 8 really great footballers, then if they're that great, they should like that's enough people that should be able to. If they're good enough, then they can't all be great and born at the wrong time at the same time.
This is like the Mayo conversation.
You're talking about guys who are sort of on their own or with 1 or 2 others, and then before and after them, the minute the right before they broke onto the team, like there's how many guys came onto the Kerry team like Maurice Fitzgerald in 1986. You know what I mean? But how many of them were Maurice Fitzgerald? Very few, and that's the problem. That was that's the exact problem. But Maurice Fitz, I actually think the more I think about it, Maurice Fitz defines this, because even though he might not have stood out in the way he was, right? Maurice Fitz was literally came on to the Kerry team in 1986, and by 2000, when they started being like, they won it in 97 because of him, right? But in 2000, when they started being the best team in the country again, and would be for another 10 years, right? He was finished. I know he played in 01 and all this, but think about that, you know what I mean? He literally defines it. He was the face of Kerry football in their worst ever era.
Oh, you won't find too many arguments for me.
Yeah, okay. Sorry, I you have to work out these things as we go along. Anyway, we'll move on, I think, to a really exciting club weekend, I think, because without going into kind of the specifics of too many of the games, it sort of had everything you want, didn't it?
I was kind of buzzing thinking about Monday about the different strands of a weekend like this, and it's it's nearly a shame we don't have enough time to appreciate it. Like, you start with a headline, say, example, the county final up in Antrim. A lot of people watch this game on TG Carr, Dunloy. Shorty Seals. I remember when he stood down from Intercounty a couple of years ago, and Antrim people, I remember Sambo Naughton bemoaning the fact that they were going to be missing out on this guy who had struggled with, I think he had 2 hip operations, 1 on either hip. He was only 29 when he left Intercounty. Said he wanted whatever he had left, he wanted to give to his club, which I think is a sentiment we all appreciated. It's kind of reminded me a small bit. I was actually thinking of him. I'm talking about Paul Trials here, by the way. I was thinking of him when Brendan Maher retired for Tipperary as well, and this kind of idea that the club is a special place. So he played in 2007, won a county final that year, missed 2009 because of injury. He's now won 3 in a row in the last 3 years. He's so experienced at winning county titles, Mick, that he knew to take the lid off the trophy before he lifted it up. Because if anybody saw that clip on TG Carr, you watched the game afterwards, and I saw a video. They were paraded down the main street, right? And they had a marching band, like full whatever instruments, the whole type thing. I'm sure they were very good musically, but you couldn't hear a single thing because the team was up the back of a cement lorry, and the cement lorry just beeping constantly. So all you could hear is flares going off all sides, horns. It was brilliant to see. It's, to me, that looked like, not to cast a narrative here, that looked like a team celebrating not only this county final success, but last year's, which they actually couldn't celebrate at the time. That the fact that they had this kind of phenomenal outpouring, and we've how many times have we spoken how brilliant it is to see like a Corrigan Park packed out. Game wasn't, it was pretty one-sided at the end of the day. But from an Antrim hurling perspective, you look at Ryan Elliott, the young Antrim goalkeeper, Shauna Elliott in full forward. She isn't going nowhere. But as well as that now, there's definitely a new crop there. Antrim hurling is on the cusp of something, I think, and that's very exciting. But then you start just exactly, yeah, and you start just looking down the list and looking around the county, and everywhere you look, there's like genuinely fascinating storylines unfolding. You go down to Kerry and you look at Sean O'Shea. We're going to talk about people shooting the lights out. He scored 13 points for the Kerry Championship. The way that has been blown open this year is kind of phenomenal. On one side you've got Legionnaire Crows getting relegated. Your teams like Temple who just recently promoted, going strong. Kenmare, Stefano Combar, by all accounts. I was surprised now. I haven't seen any reports of how he went, but my sources are telling me he looked very good for Nagal when he came back at the weekend. We spoke small bit about him last weekend.
Yeah,
I think that's one to definitely watch out for. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he's back home now. A lot of what the last time he played for Nagal, I was talking to him a couple of months ago about this. Christmas 2019, he was allowed to go home. Geelong said you can go home, and he asked him, "Can I have permission to play for my club in a 7-a-side tournament, sort of Stephen's Day tournament?" And Geelong said, "Look, you can play. We have this waiver around insurance just in case you get injured, and you have to play in goals, right? You're not allowed to play a field playing in goals, 7-a-side tournament." So in fairness, he did play in goals, but he also scored 7 goals in the same tournament. So that's the scope this guy has for Kerry. So just to see him back, I think as I said last week, I think that's an exciting development, and it might take a year or two, but I definitely think there's something there. And then you look at just across the county. We last week how we were cascading like the idea of legends playing well in Club GAA, and you mentioned Brian Carroll. Like Patrick Horgan scored 213, county win by a point. I was like, Tullerone played Clara in extra time. This is the nip and tuck game, goes to extra time. Who comes up and hits a goal for Tullerone? Tommy Walsh, which is just unbelievable. You look across in the other games, Owen Larkin is still playing hurling. No matter where you look, there's unbelievably entertaining storylines, and I think we could easily spend the next 3 hours talking about it. We're gonna have to put a cap on this, because no matter where you look, there's something that you can say, geez, but wasn't that fascinating? I was watching the looking at highlights on Twitter this weekend, and you look at I sent it on to you, Keelan Sexton, shooting the lights out. There's these random clips that just always pop up around this time of the year that always you find some little moment of joy in this stuff. These games, some of them weren't even televised, and yet you still see and I suppose maybe it's good. It's a good thing that we can kind of see them more and more now, because you start to appreciate the level these guys are operating at.
Definitely, yeah. There's definitely a lot more exposure, and it is worth it. This time of year, it's good to be kind of like following local accounts and local papers and radio stations and stuff, and you get to see a lot of these clips before they're sort of shared around. But yeah, I'll take you mentioning a bit of magic from Keelan Sexton on the show anytime. You know what I mean? That sort of so speaking to somebody who doesn't get enough national appreciation as there's a number of those Clare lads. They don't qualify for the earlier conversation because they're in the best era of it. But that hand pass though that he did, people might they might have seen it, they might not have, but it was something that you've been talking about as something that's coming into the game as this new kind of bit of magic that we're seeing in football at the moment.
It's funny, I don't know, is it what it is about this skill that we do we always appreciate, the ability? People often say this about the Dublin team, their ability to hand pass left and right hand, and it seemed like a bit kind of cliched, and what does that actually mean? But for example, right, I interviewed Brian Stein's James' brother over here in Melbourne. That's where he lives, and so in '94 Brian is playing for the Melbourne Demons, plays in the VFA, doesn't work out, goes home to play for Dublin, goes into Dublin and begins to realize that this big loopy slow hand pass, he doesn't really understand why Dublin are doing it. It's slowing down the way they move the ball. So suddenly he starts trying to coach up the team that he's going to play in midfield. And sure, we know that Dublin team won the All-Ireland in '95. They probably should have won more. But all he wanted to do was players coming thundering off his shoulder. He's giving hand passes, quick, accurate ball, the way they work the ball up the field. Within a couple of years, he goes in and coaches Marks. They're Division 3, St. Mark's in Dublin. At the time, they were a Division 3 team. They went up to Division 1, went on to have unbelievable success in the Dublin Club Championship. This is same thing he wanted them to do. This is net football. A lot of quick, mobile footballers who can move the ball very quickly. A lot of it by the hand. In 2005, he moves back out to Australia. His brother Jim says, introduced him to Kevin Sheedy, who was the coach of the international rules team. Australia were hockeyed by Ireland in 2004, absolutely hockeyed. And Kevin Sheedy sat down with Brian Stein and said, write me out a game plan that'll beat Ireland. Write it out for me here. So Brian Stein's pen and paper, wrote out his notes. This is what I did with Marks. This is the type of hand passing we're going to do. Forget about coaching this team to kick O'Neill's ball. They've never seen one before. We're going to forget about picking all Australian players, which they've done for the years previously. Pick players who are suited to what we want to play, which is mobile, quick, players who are capable hand passers. 2005, they absolutely destroyed Ireland in every sense. Now it has to be said. Just destroyed Ireland. Same thing again in 2006. And then you look at the players who come back from Australia. This obviously it's a huge skill here. Is that the handball over here? Conor McKenna's hand pass this year, I mean, like we were waxing lyrically after the Ireland final. It doesn't seem to look. The fact that he can not only making a pass like that without looking is exceptional, but a pass of that distance without looking, to have the trust to know I can make this pass without having to bank it. Last year, I don't know if you remember this, in the Mayo Championship, the Brafey game when against Ballydoreen, and there was this clip that went Irish viral, which was a long kick out to Keane Hanley, who's just back from Brisbane, obviously Pierce Hanley's younger brother, and he gave a hand pass to Andy Moore. And I mean, it's not only the
30 yards, I'd say, was it?
But it's not only the distance that he passed, it's also the accuracy. And this goes to the Sexton one as well. It's one of those, it's a hand pass that lobs like beautifully and lands perfectly. Because those, if you like fire rifle that, a fullback could get a hand in. If Sexton hits that hard, there's a guy standing in front of him, so it needs to kind of float and lob. It's nearly like one of those, like Paul Scholes-esque passes that kind of floats and lands perfectly for the player. It's not, it's not this direct, quick ball that Brian Steins was talking about. It's nearly it's a step beyond that. But it's only when you see it in action that you realize, oh yeah, that actually isn't a skill that is every single player can execute. And when it's done properly, it can be so brutally effective.
Yeah, the Sexton one this weekend, I think if people see it, like there's an added extra element of difficulty and bamboozling for the defenders in that it just looked like he was lining himself up for a shot and changed the direction of the ball by passing it over for a goal chance. So even that, I think the overall point is, for me anyway, is that like we see hand passing as almost this thing that's detrimental to skill in football.
It's become
because
like a
it is
nasty
the simple thing and there's too much of it in the game and so on and so forth. And booting the ball was what the skill of Gaelic football is. But as everything, it evolves and it evolves over time, and it's becoming more and more. And we've just given you 3 examples that are only from the last 12 months. One of them was in the All-Ireland final, of where that skill is becoming a bigger and bigger weapon all the time, because it isn't just this fundamental, rudimentary thing that every single player can do. Like everything, it has levels, and it has levels of difficulty, and it has levels of impact.
Yeah, and one thing I've noticed about Conor McKenna is not only like is he capable of making that pass, he's capable of making it off left or right, which again is like you say it out loud and it sounds nearly elementary. It sounds like, oh well, this is basics, but the fact is it's not basics. Players being able to execute off left and right. Like if players could execute off left or right, Mayo could have had 2 goals in the first for the All-Ireland final, but they weren't, because they took chances. Players weren't capable of taking that chance on the left foot, and that's as simple as it is, it's also true.
Yeah, absolutely. So that was the club weekend. There is more going on in the world of GAA as well. It's not unusual for Laois to go after a Kerry man. In fact, I think Billy Sheehan might be the 3rd in a row to come in there and take the job. Obviously, Miko has been in there before as well. What do you think of this?
So we go back to what we said last week about what is it that Galway need at this moment, and we're about to talk about Laois and Leitrim right now, and you take the context of that at the time, and I think this is a really good appointment. I think they're both Laois hasn't been confirmed yet, Leitrim are confirmed anymore, and it looks like it's a formality that Billy Sheehan is going to get the Laois role. But what you're looking for is a knowledgeable coach who will give a team a bounce, a team who have been not mired negatively, but I've a huge amount of sympathy for what Michael Clark had to endure because of COVID, and I think that was a significant disruptor for his reign. At the same time, the way it finished was I can't imagine it was satisfactory for anybody involved. And so you bring in somebody like this, and Leitrim, the way saying they were hockeyed by Mayo, and half the county was talking about, this was a conversation. A conversation after that game was the fact that A, the game didn't sell out, which was pretty surprising. B, we need provincial championship perform. Surprise, surprise. So I think what you're looking for with these kind of appointments is a knowledgeable coach to come in, just give that kind of bounce, give that air of positivity, and that's in both contexts, I think they've nailed that in terms of ticking off that box.
Yeah, it's funny though. I like the Andy Moran thing is. There's a part of me that doesn't understand it from his point of view. I don't know. There's experience to be gained, absolutely, but there's so much work to go into something that has got so few possibilities in its return. And I don't mean that in any disrespect. I mean it in the system that we have. And look, maybe that system is all going to be thrown out the window, and Andy Moran's going to be at the forefront of, the incredible tier 2 or whatever it is that we're going to end up with, and Leitrim are going to be competitive. But considering the conversation we had around Leitrim in the Connacht Championship this year and how it dominated the entire week because there was no point in having that as a game of football, I just question from the manager's point of view, this is your first job, this is the one that's going to lay your reputation, be you wanting the Mayo job in the future or whatever it might be. And at the same time, sometimes I just think I possibly overthink these things, and these guys just see an opportunity and they say, "Grand, that sounds like I want to be involved in teams, and this is a good one for me. It's a county team, and let's give it a go, and we might have a bit of fun."
Yeah. So yeah, well, actually, first I do agree with that, but secondly, just on what you said there, I don't want to. If I could just go off on a small tangent here for a second, Mick, I don't want to. I don't want to. I don't want to keep bringing this up, right? I don't want to keep bringing this up, but just on the proposal B that's going ahead in Congress, so partly I love to hear the counter arguments against proposal B, because partly I'm currently actually, we were planning on discussing this, and you go and you look for people to challenge on this, to debate it, because it's good to hear alternative views, and there's so little of them. There's so little alternative views out there. The main two are Jim McGuinness and Brian McElroy, who've been in the media plenty over the last week. Otherwise, I was severely, he's a fabulous journalist, good article, but I was severely unsettled by the fact that a provincial chairman was quoted in the Sunday Independent in a Dermot Crowe article at the weekend, and he wasn't named. So it was he gave a quote coming up against it, but he wasn't named. Like, to my mind, we need to know, this is going back to why we need to know how people are voting in Congress, and we need to know who is coming out against this, and we need to develop into arguments. So I think that is very important. Now, an argument that has been put forward a lot against Proposal B is because it doesn't do enough for the weaker counties. So we've heard this a lot, that the Tailteann Cup won't get the Tailteann Cup, won't get the attention it deserves, that we're locking them off, that there's no chance of progression. Now, you take Andy Moran and Leitrim, right? And you offer them two options for next year. They're probably one of the weakest counties in the country based off their form last year. So we'll offer them two options. So option A is what they faced this year, which is they're going into a Division 4 league. What are they going to aim for in Division 4 league in 2022 when you've got Tipperary and Cavan down there next year? So if they're realistic, there's very little chances of promotion in Division 4 league campaign. At the best, you're looking to develop that. What are you developing to get absolutely hockeyed by Galway or Mayo in the open round of the Connacht Championship next year? And that's their 2022 in a nutshell, right? Alternatively, you offer them option B. And option B for Leitrim next year is a provincial championship, which won't carry the same weight, which will have to still get 4 games, to get the opportunity to develop. He'll get an opportunity to get to know his squad, learn. Then you go into the height of summer and you give them 7 competitive championship games. And at the end of those 7 championship games, they obviously aim to be the best they can be. They aim for Division 4. That's unlikely. But even though it isn't unlikely, you give them the opportunity to develop momentum in a Tailteann Cup where they might be playing teams of a similar level, and they could suddenly feel like there's a sense of progress where we have something to aim for. We have realistic expectations out of this summer. And so it's so blatant. Option B is so much more preferable for the so-called weaker counties. Yeah. You give them the opportunity to progress. Games, these counties are always crying out for games. How many times are we hearing that one of the biggest problems is that they lose the open round of the championship? Everyone wants to go off to the States for the summer. Why are players even holding on? Why would you stay around if you're only going to play 1 or 2 games at the start of the year and then you're gone? This gives them a full calendar, a calendar full of games, competitive games with realistic goals all the way along. I cannot see for the life of me how people can argue this isn't in the interest of weaker counties.
Yeah, All sport is going to have teams that are unlikely to win, but you don't want this for them to be impossible to win. Not the main competition anyway. So look, we've had this argument for years. Why not have levels? Just to remind everybody, in case they missed last week or they haven't been paying attention, and these things can get thrown around. There's proposal B, proposal A, so on and so forth. Proposal B, in its most simplest form, is to flip the calendar. So, and look, we could talk again about where teams fall into knockouts and how that works, and that might be where this falls down, to be honest, because that's where some of the fear is. But in its most simplest form, you have the provincial championship where the league is currently, and then you have what is the league basically now as the championship, which goes into playoffs and preliminary quarterfinals and so on and so forth. The biggest, actually, just while I'm on this, because and I see your point there about Leitrim, and I presume that's kind of like to Andy Moran's point. He will be looking at, like, that's Leitrim's best hope, so therefore it's also Andy Moran's best hope at the moment. But just on the issue there, I saw a lot of people complaining. Look, maybe option B is the best of a bad bunch, but if you finish 6th of 8 in Division 1, you're out of the championship, right? If you finish in the top 5, you go through to what's the quarterfinals. But if you finish top of Division 2 or 3, you stay in. There's ways and means to kind of stay in the championship if you're from a lower division, which is great, whatever. There's a lot of conversation saying, oh, it is that punishes the better teams. I don't understand why. I've seen people in Mayo, nothing to do with Mayo, not picking them out. I just happen to have seen the example, okay? Saying, if Mayo finished 6th in Division 1, it's not fair they're out of the championship if Kildare are still in it, having won Division 2. They're playing at a higher level. They've had harder matches. For me, Kildare will then have to play those teams that have already beaten Mayo. And Mayo, who you're only in a competition to win it, you're not in it to make a certain point. They'll have had 7 games to make top 5 of an 8-team tournament. If you're not good enough to do that, then why should you progress? I get the point that you've earned your way into a higher level and you have to play more difficult games, but you also don't have the same level. You don't have the same degree of difficulty in terms of what you have to achieve within your division to stay in it. Do you see my point? I don't really understand the argument.
I think this is possibly one of the most important things to come out of this forum, because you've touched on something that has been discussed a lot over the last 2 weeks. And
why not just start with the 8 teams and just have quarterfinals and not bother with anything else if everybody should be in it just because they're already in Division 1? Sorry. Well,
So for those who aren't aware, as Mick has mentioned, we're talking about a flip. What they're calling it this flip model. So it's a league-based championship, but the provincial championships become a round robin, which we'll have earlier in the year. Leinster will be split in 2. Everyone is going to get still a full calendar of games. They won't carry the same weight. They didn't carry much weight at the minute anyway, because 3 of them were formalities. So we'll deal with that. That's boxed off. Now the thing about the league is that you've got the top 5 teams in Division 1, 3 teams in Division 2, top team in Division 3 and 4 get into a preliminary quarterfinal. So the counter argument is that a lot of people will say, look at Division 1 is the best teams. You're playing against the best opposition. Everybody wants to be in Division 1. It primes you to be in the championship. I actually, if I was honest, I kind of like the idea. Kieran Shannon is the only one I've seen proposing this, that instead of having a Division 1 and 2, you have a 1A and 1B, kind of like the league, and just pick the top 4 from each, and they go into a quarterfinal. I think that might be a slightly fair proposal. At the same time, look at, everybody wants to be in Division 1 because you're playing against elite level teams, and if you can't finish in the top 5, do you necessarily deserve to be there anyway? I agree with that as well. However, I would just stress for anybody who is using this as an argument against the voting for proposal B, or that these are amendments that can happen if we adopt the best structure. We've got 3 options in this special Congress, right? We've got 3 options. We've got option A, which is nonsense, which is redrawing the provincial boundaries. Apparently everyone will get a fair calendar, but you're just moving weaker counties across. All you're doing is you're moving the deck chairs on the Titanic, to my mind. Option B is the one we just discussed. Option C is the status quo. Now, it's been proposed it has been said by journalists who know a lot more than I do, who would be a lot more attuned, that there's scope for option B to be knocked back, with the idea that we can get these amendments further down the line. So I saw Damien Lawler from RTE things seem to suggest that the most likely candidate is that they go for C with scope to amend. I saw Michael Foley, I heard him speak on Second Captains recently, and he said something similar. He thinks that it might even be the February Congress where we will see a new proposal for an amendment. I would stress, right? Maybe I'm more cynical than they are. Perhaps that's true, but I would just stress, the fixture review committee that came up with these proposals, that was first proposed. It was first suggested in 2017. So we're talking about nearly 4 years ago. In 2017, this was first proposed. They first met in 2018. 2019, there's Club Players Association, which is now no longer around. They walked off it because they weren't happy with the way it was conducted. They proposed amendments at the end of 2019. So that was 2 years ago. And 2021, we're going to enact them. So if you think that we're going to come up with a better proposal in February or next year or in 2 years down the line, if you revert to the status quo, I just see there's absolutely zero scope for that, especially given the fact that this is a special Congress. So you need less. There's less delegates here. There's less votes. So if there's less votes, there's less scope for this to get over the line.
Yeah.
So to my mind, the GAA's history, what we know from Congress across history is that if they come with something as radical as a new championship structure, it's going to get voted down. I think this is a golden window. I really think this is a golden window. I agree, to be honest. If I'm honest, I do agree that there's scope for improvements within this provincial structure. I absolutely agree with that. I think maybe to satisfy the quells about the provincial championship, for example, if you finish top of the provincial championships, why don't we give those teams extra home games, for example, or maybe even just an extra point when they go into this league structure? I think there's scope to do that sort of stuff down the line. But these are improvements that can be made after we adopt the best option on the table. I really hope we adopt the option B to do that.
That's a great politician speech for you there, Maurice. That was a real we called to action there. My biggest hope, honestly, though, is like if it's voted down, there's kind of all kinds of special interests that could vote down something. But honestly, if it's something as simple as, oh, well, we don't want to finish 7th in Division 1 and be knocked out of the championship because what's the point of that? Where it's not fair that somebody else is still in it. Like, that will really annoy me, because not only is it this sense of entitlement because you don't feel like you have to win matches to stay in the championship, which is bananas. But the other part of it is, though, we need to have some jeopardy all the way through the competition, or else nobody's going to watch it. How often are we in this position where if everything is just building up towards quarterfinals and almost every team is going to be in it, that have a chance, and those matches won't matter? And it's so important that championship matches will continue to matter. And if we need to have jeopardy, we need to have a game between Donegal and Kerry or something like that, where the loser is knocked out and it's before the knockout championships. And that's going to, for the viewer, for the public, for everybody watching, that's what we need. We need to have at least 1 or 2 of those games that really matter early-ish in the championship, and not this, we'll find our form along the way. It's like Dublin, we're only really training for the last 3 games where we'll do enough because we don't actually have to do all that much, So that would be my big concern. But you're so right in what you say. Let's get it over the line. Let's change the fundamental structure, and all the tweaking can be done after that. They tweak the championship all the time anyway.
Yeah, and like I said, Mick, the arguments against this, as I said, I will listen to anybody who wants to argue against it. I think some people have made very good arguments against it, but too many of the arguments against this are totally disingenuous to my mind. It's either people not engaging with it or deliberately misconstruing what we're posing. So, say for example, the Irish Independent this morning has published an article against Marion Brennan, an article against Proposal B, and one of his lines in it is he thinks it's illogical to have a 10-team championship, and he keeps repeating this line that it's a 10-team championship. Now, as you have so well laid out there, this is not a 10-team championship. It's so disingenuous to say this is a 10-team championship. He's picking the top 5 teams from Division 1, 3 teams from Division 2, the top team from Division 3 and 4, and saying those 10 teams go on to play in the championship. Playing championship games already at the start. This is a championship base. The league is based around championship games. This will be paid with championship intensity to get into a quarter final. To say that, to my mind, to say that is as disingenuous to say that we go into the hurling where only 6 teams are playing in the championship by playing the Munster League and the Leinster League. I think that argument is, as I said, there's definitely criticisms that can be made of this, but that stuff is nonsense to my mind.
But that's so often the case in, like, you take it from all the way from politics to sport or whatever, like anything like this, anything that is political, right? It's like, it's a narrative creation there. So if people are writing about this in opposition to it, to say that it's not the championship until that last 10, then it actually won't be. It's self-fulfilling. You know what I mean? The competition won't matter in the way it could. Whereas if we approach this as the championship starts on that first game of the league, whatever the language they're going to use, then that's the championship. And it literally is as simple as that. It depends on what way you approach it.
You're probably right. Yeah. Yeah. Maybe it is like that's a good point. Yeah, maybe it is like I keep saying the league even, and I know like people have connotations with
groups. We should
the
probably be
league.
calling it or something.
Yeah. That's really
Round
a good
robin.
point.
Whatever it might be. We don't think of the Munster and Leinster hurling championship round robins as not the championship. Anyway, right, okay, I think that's enough on that. The other thing actually that we should briefly talk about is the GPA have backed this, right? So a lot of that analysis, I wonder, in these things you have to hear from a lot of people, you have to hear from a lot of people how they're going to vote and so on and so forth. You can be a couple of days behind in your vote count in a way, you know what I mean? It's a very normal thing for these guys like Damien Lawler or whoever who are so on top of this stuff. It's unbelievable. I would trust them completely, but I will trust what they say on the weekend of Congress rather than a couple of weeks out.
Yeah, of course.
GPA have come and back this, and I wonder how much that's going to matter. And it's also, they opened up like loads of conversations during the week to things like Friday Night Lights, which the GPA have been against in the past and have been like, and I've always understood why. I've always thought that there's, this assumption that we should just make players do things, because that have to go to work and all. I always thought was terrible. But look, if they're open to it, I'm definitely open to it. If the GPA are coming forward with it, I'm thinking this is the greatest idea of all time.
Yeah, exactly. Like that's, I mean, you hit the nail on the head there. I was always people. I think we talked about it on the old podcast about, and I was adamantly against the idea of Friday night games because players had been vocally opposed to it at the time. But if players are endorsing it, I think that just gives us so much more scope for. Again, it keeps coming back to this. We have such a fabulous opportunity. Like, can you imagine how exciting it would be to have Friday, Saturday, Sunday, genuinely competitive games? One of the biggest complaints during the league is that there's too many games going on, a Saturday night, and we don't get to see how entertaining those are. So if you spread those out, you could have the GAA could dominate these 4 months. And that's another thing about this, Mick, as well, that should be stressed. Under the proposal B, you've got 2 months of the provincial league, we'll call it the provincial league at the start of it.
The first league, yeah.
and then the round robin championship is 4 months of the summer. It's 4 months of the summer, but we're going to get that. So you could that could be a competitive 4 months of dominant games, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. I think that would be absolutely wonderful. Added in on top of it. What always tends to happen is that hurling is wonderfully entertaining this time of the year. We're always complaining about Gaelic football. Gaelic football comes in towards the end. Now we could have like a 4 months of just jam-packed action. As I said,
I can't wait to hear how much you're going to come. If it does get through, and please, let's say we hope with those fingers crossed, I'm giving you a month before you start preemptively complaining about the Sunday game coverage and the TV deal and how we're not getting enough. So let's hope they throw in. They have a bit of a think about what their TV deal strategy is going forward as well. But let's get it passed first. Look, you'll be back talking about this. I'm might or might not be here next week, but I think you're going to do some stuff on it ahead of Congress. My dates are awaiting. I will be missing for some time, people. I may as well just say what it is instead of being really cryptic. My wife is due a baby very soon, so I'll be taking some weeks off, but Maurice will be in the hot seat, so I may or may not be here next week. We'll see how that goes. But before we go, Maurice, we have one more suggestion about players who were born at the wrong time from Dara on Twitter, who lists a couple of Dublin players from, I kind of understand where he's coming from here, kind of from the Pillar era. Kieran Whelan, Shane Ryan, Mossy Quinn. I would say Shane Ryan, no, in a way, is that Shane Ryan was a very good footballer who had one or two like really good years for Dublin, like where he was a star, but won an All-Star. And I think that's kind of, I think maybe that was about the level for it. Mossy, possibly, and Kieran Whelan, you probably I'd say he's the guarantee one there, isn't he? Like that, if he would have fit into those other Dublin teams that before or after he just missed an All Ireland in '95, and he was finished in 2009, I think. So he's 1 year off the other All Ireland. That might define what we're talking about here. Kieran Whelan would have been in the team. It's not whether you're a star or not or such. It's just that whether you came along at the wrong time. I feel like Kieran Whelan would have been in any Dublin team, but he missed the great team in the 90s, and then he missed the great team in the 2010s.
Yeah. So would you see a possibility that if Mossy Quinn was in the modern Dublin team, could we hold Mossy Quinn in the same regard? Let's say you put him in and like in this awe-inspiring all dominant, all singing, all dancing Dublin team, is there scope that he would be regarded nationally in the same echelon as Paul Mannion, Bernard Brogan, or maybe a tier below that slightly, like not a tier below, but you know what I mean? Like,
no, I think for me anyway, I think Mossy would have been on a level with Dean Rock. He would have been the free taker, and I think he would have been that player who, when you go and see Dublin, you're like, Jesus, I always only think of Dean Rock as the free taker, but actually he's after getting 1-2 here, and he's the most dangerous forward today. You know, like I think that's where Mossy would fit in this Dublin team.
This is another, like, this is a debate we'll have again, but this is something you mentioned, the Brian Carroll thing earlier today about what he scored. I don't want to dwell on this for too long.
No, let's do it. This is a conversation about frees that actually was on our running order. We were going a little bit late, so I decided to skip it. You've brought it up now. We're going to finish the show with it. We've got 5 minutes.
So Dean Rock, an often criticism of that Dean Rock gets too often to my mind is that he's just a free taker in this Dublin team, which is just, I mean, like I honestly, I like, part of me kind of doesn't want to engage with this. So you mentioned Brian Carroll scoring 315. It's funny when you look, there's a reply to that tweet and someone says, there were 2 soft goals. And I was like, what are 2 soft goals? Like, so I went and looked it up, and the first one was a penalty, and you can say, you know, I can see why he makes that argument. The second one, he scored a goal from a free, which isn't an easy thing to do. Don't know how that's a soft one, but it still means that he scored 1-4 from play. Like, I don't know what you account for that. And then you also have this, it's like it's an asterisk that, you know, on the plus side, he scored 315, but on the minus side, a lot of it was you know, set pieces. Does it really count? Like, what else did he do besides it? I don't understand this. Patrick Horgan is another one. He scored 213.
Yeah,
the Sean O'Shea one is a good example. Like, I can see some of the scope for that argument, but it's just so baffling to me that frees are assumed to be some sort of formality that don't necessarily, there's no skill involved in it. That it's just, you know, it's regarded as look, didn't he do well to knock over those couple of frees? Somebody else would have done if he wasn't there.
So you have more opportunity. I think that's important to bring up. Like, so, but actually, all the top scorers, like, are going to be free takers. You know, and it's just, you see 315, you know, there's frees involved there. There's no way he wasn't taking the free. So I think that, and it's still an astonishing score. Do you remember, like, I think when Horgan got his 310 against Kilkenny a couple of years ago,
final, yeah,
I think it was like, but he only got 3-1 from play or something like that. And I was like, 3-1 is like an unbelievable score. It's like, it's performance of the season. But also, I remember that game. A couple of those frees were unbelievable. You know, and that's where you have to consider it, is like, you get extra chances, you get the penalty, you get so on and so forth. But, you know, very often these lads are winning those frees. And then secondly, is like, you know, they standing up to do them. And I think when you see a free taker not there, you kind of see what they've done, because there's a reason that these guys are on the frees. There's a reason it's so much pressure on them. And I don't think it ever should be discounted. I also think, I was just saying to you beforehand without going into it, but the Clare hurler Colin Ryan, who you were doing stuff with this summer, right? When I was at the 2013, he would have been one of those players that a lot of fans, in a very kind of a glib way, would say, you know, he's just a free taker, you know, like they're carrying, you know, when you're carrying a player a little bit. And I remember that game in 2013, the All-Ireland semi-final against Limerick, which I would argue, I don't know if he'd agree, was his best game that I've seen him in for Clare anyway, right? And got Clare to an All-Ireland final. And he did it in 2 ways that day, because he did it in a way of having one of his best games in open play that I can remember. He was just brilliant. He won an awful lot of possession. He used an awful lot of possession, and he got a couple of scores as well. But then also, on a day when Declan Hannon was missing frees on the other side, and really, I mean, it absolutely crippled Limerick on the day, Colin hit everything. He hit, I think he might have hit 10 frees that day, and you could say, 10, like, his score probably came up as 12 points, 10 frees, you know, and you'd read it in the paper and you're like, yeah, sure, like, Clare probably dominated, they won a lot of frees. He was hitting them from everywhere, and they were missing on the other end, and it won Clare the match and got them to an All-Ireland final. And I was thinking to myself, like, he was man of the match that day, and I was sitting there watching that game, and there's no doubt in my mind he was. I don't remember if he won it or not. I don't think he did. But you have to take each performance like that on its own merits as well. And sometimes there is bigger pressure than others. That's an All-Ireland semi-final as well, let's not forget, you know. And I think the fact that we just dismiss the idea that hitting 10 frees over the course of a game, football or hurling, is this easy freebie that you get that doesn't really count. Oh, he really only got 2 points.
Yeah, yeah.
It's such bollocks.
So a couple of years ago, I asked, I wrote about this last year about Dean Rock for Dublin, and we asked Stephen Rushford, do you mind who's the most important player for Dublin? And he said it was Dean Rock. And a lot of people would point to Conor Callaghan or Brian Fenton or Stephen Cookson, I imagine, at the time. But one thing on that is that when you have a free taker like that, psychologically, the damage it does to another team, where if you make the smallest mistake, like the smallest foul, there's no scope for error because he's going to punish you. Like he is absolutely going to punish you. And I think, ironically, Mayo suffered when Killian. Look, we always knew this was going to happen. You're going to appreciate Killian Connor's absence when he's actually injured. But Mayo suffered because they didn't have that same sort of jeopardy that opposing defenders knew. There's a 50-50 chance, even if I foul him here, the scope that Ryan Rooney might miss this, that Michael might miss this free, and so that it influences all. Like rest assured, Mick. Like this is you speak to inter-county players and there are certain teams they will tactically foul against. They will deliberately tactically foul, maybe out in your sidelines to give free takers to psych them out because they know their mentality might be brittle, and if they missed first one or two, it could lead to a very slippery slope, and that will have all the impact as the game wears on. Now, the other side of this, I've actually used this case this summer. We're going to have an all-star, or sorry, this winter, summer here in Australia, winter over there. We're going to have an all-star debate about who gets in and who doesn't get in. And I've seen a lot of people use the case that Sean O'Shea has to get in because he's the top scorer in the championship. So he has to get in. Now, I think in those circumstances, context is very important. So, like, who's the top scorer from Play this year? It's Darren McCurry. From McCurry's perspective, if it comes down to a straight shootout between Paddy Clifford and Sean O'Shea, I think Paddy Clifford should get the onus there. Because in the context I'm talking about here, the chips were down for Kerry. There was 2 times when the chips were down for Kerry this year. One was the 20-minute spell in the first half against Cork when things were going against them, and the other was in the extra time in Tyrone when things were going against them. And both times the man who instigated the comeback was Paddy Clifford. Whether it was his score, that amazing score, he won the ball inside his own half and drove, even though he'd been well matched by Moyer all that game, but he still was constantly plugging away, constantly trying. Like I even though Deshaun O'Shea scored 9 points against Tyrone, but he missed the free at the end, but one of them was from Play. But yeah. I give Paddy Hampsey. I think Paddy Hampsey marshaled him very well that day. I would give him the edge. Where I think in those kind of circumstances, so I guess I would kind of use it against him that when people keep saying he's a top scorer, I would use the case. Well, technically, a lot of that was from frees if you look at it from Play. But then at the same time, you look at it from Play, and I still think he's like, is he third? I think it might be McCurry, Darren McHale, because he scored all those he shot the lights out against Sligo, Sean O'Shea, David Clifford. I think something like that is the in and around that. I think is the top scorers from Play. So he still is well up there. But the blanket look at he's the top scorer in that circumstance. I probably would use the context. Yeah, but I mean it wasn't all from Play. So I could see this is a sword I'll use both ways.
But it's because you can't judge it on the box score. You have to take into account how he did. So I don't think he had a very good game against Tyrone. I did think he had a very good game. I think he had a very good season up until that. But you're judging it on, do you know what? He was hitting over the frees. It's a point for him. But if you're looking at his overall total, you can't just throw it in there with Darren McCurry, who wasn't taking any frees.
So look, there's nuance to this. Yeah, absolutely, there's nuance to this stuff as well. You can get down into the real nitty-gritty and talk about shot efficiency. I think I used I'm going back a couple of years here. 2019, I think I said to Colin McShane, David Clifford should get it over Colin McShane because they were of a similar level, but McShane's volume of frees was massive, but they actually weren't that accurate. He'd missed a huge amount of frees that year, whereas Clifford, so you can get right into the nitty-gritty. And I will rest assured I am as capable to cherry pick stuff to suit a narrative as anybody. So I'm sure I've done it in the past and I'll do it in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. So are we saying Mossy Quinn then? Yeah. He's getting
I think so. I think he's nearly
at the wrong time.
Yeah, I think he's nearly the perfect example of exactly what we're talking about here. Whereas if he'd just come across a couple of years later, he could have not realized his true potential, but certainly been more celebrated.
There you go, Mossy. You're in. You and Kieran Whelan are the 2 dubs on the team, along with Brian Carroll. It's a hurling football hybrid team. You play one half of each. Brian Carroll and Shane Dooley are in there. Jimmy Smith.
We're very short in defenders. Ollie Canning is holding the fort by himself at the minute.
Michael Meehan, Ollie Canning, and I can't do. Did we say Benny Coulter and Jamie Clark? Right. Okay. So we'll probably get a few more in. Where Kieran McDonald's not allowed in, but Maurice Fitzgerald is. So there's a lot of attacking talent on this team. We need some backs. Okay, that's it for this week. We'll be back hopefully. We'll be back one way or another, but possibly without me next week. But enjoy the GAA week to come, and that includes what's bound to be a lot of twists and turns in managerial merry-go-rounds and everything else as well that comes with a GAA week. But enjoy it, and talk to you next week, Maurice.
Cheers, Mick.